Hello, hello. What happens when you're standing at the threshold of the thing you've worked your entire life to achieve, only to watch it slip away because of your own decisions? Last night, the NBA team, the San Antonio Spurs, suffered what is likely to go down as the most devastating collapse in the history of the NBA Finals. And coincidentally, the day before that, we got the new memoir from co-founding Soundgarden guitarist Kim Thayil. 3 decades ago, Soundgarden reached the end of one of rock music's most extraordinary runs, not with triumph, but with confusion, frustration, and the feeling that, in Thayil's own words from the book, it wasn't supposed to end like this. Today, I'm going to be talking about success, collapse, and what it feels like when the stories we tell ourselves about how things are supposed to be end suddenly not according to our expectations and everything falls apart. Welcome to the 47th Feedback Deaf live stream, an ongoing conversation about music, sports, culture, memory, and meaning. I am Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. I would urge you to hit the like, subscribe, notification, and hype buttons, and most of all, to weigh in the comments. I'm going to start by showing you footage from last night's game. I'm going to show you the very end of the game, and hopefully won't get in trouble for that. Let's see here. So let me show you the last few seconds of this game. As I watched in horror, with the outcome of this game, the horror was mounting for a long time before this point. But here are the last few seconds of what went on last night.
He backs off though. Brunson trying to get free into the hands of Brunson. Brunson's got Vasil on him. Crossover, drives, goes inside, pulls back, picks it out in the corner. Brunson gets it back. Brunson on the drive, the floater's up. Shot won't go, rebound deflected in the backcourt. Fox has a chance to get it. Fox has it inside, blocked by Anunoby. 9 seconds remain.
Okay, so let me pause this and just explain. As you can see by the score, the San Antonio Spurs are up 106 to 105 with 8 seconds left. There was a few more seconds than that left as that sequence that you just saw unfolded. Going into the half, or at one point in the game, the Spurs were up 29 points. No team in the history of the NBA Finals has ever given up a lead that big. And after the half, as the third quarter started, you began to sense this change. Like, I almost texted my brother at halftime and said, there's no way the Knicks are going to win tonight. Just a little bit of context. This was the fourth game in this finals best of 7 series. This was the second game in New York. The New York Knicks won the first 2 games in San Antonio. The San Antonio Spurs got off to an early lead in all 4 games. The Knicks came back to win those first 2. Then San Antonio won the third game a couple nights ago, which spoiled the party for the entire New York fan base. The New York Knicks have not won an NBA championship since 1973. That's 53 years ago. I have a very close friend who was at last night's game, and I was thinking, my God, he must like the Spurs had such a commanding lead. I'm like, this guy must be dying inside. You could see the dejection on the fans. They showed a picture of Chris Rock with an older woman. I'm not sure if it was his mom or an older relative of his, or somebody he knows, or maybe somebody he doesn't know at all, sitting right next to him, and just the looks on their faces. I mean, it was like they had been zapped of all their energy. And I thought, let me not send this text to my brother right now, because if I send it somehow, you as a sports fan, you believe that somehow you can affect the machinations of the universe somehow, and like saying something prematurely will result in the opposite happening. And I'm glad I didn't send that text because once the half was over and we got into the third quarter, you could see the mojo had completely changed. The Spurs were taking what are in basketball called 3-point shots. They were missing them and missing them and missing them and missing them and missing them. And the Knicks kept chipping away at this lead, at this lead, at this lead. And I could tell sitting at home, and I am a basketball ignoramus, I felt, why isn't the coach calling a timeout, rallying his troops, and just being like, okay, guys, settle down. We don't need to be getting greedy and shooting 3-point shots. They're not working for us right now as they were earlier in the game. You know, the Spurs were on a hot streak. They had a hot hand with these 3-point shots. The thing with basketball is that it's very streaky. And unlike baseball, where you get on streaks that last for several games or weeks, in basketball, streaks change multiple times within the game. You can have, so there's 4 quarters in basketball. You can have a team go on a hot run for half of a quarter and then have the momentum flip. Basketball is a very high adrenaline sport to watch. There's lots, it's like a roller coaster ride when it's at its best. You could immediately tell going into the third quarter at the start that the Spurs were losing their grip on the game. But there was an ample opportunity to stop the bleeding. And so I'm sitting at home, who knows, less than 1/1,000,000th about basketball than the Spurs coach. This guy probably sneezes more basketball knowledge than I will ever know, than I could ever know in 5 lifetimes. And I'm like, well, if I know this at home, why isn't he doing it? And it just got me questioning. It's like, where is the leadership? What is the job of a coach here? Why can't you take charge and lead your team and stop them from themselves? What is the rationale or the lack thereof for letting these guys bury themselves? Totally shot themselves in the foot, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And as I said, I started to watch with horror. Even though my brother is a lifelong Knicks fan, even though my friend who was at this game, shout out to Professor Pete, by the way, any opinions I express on this podcast are not endorsed by my friend Professor Pete, or Dr. Pete as I call him. He is a lifelong Knicks fan. He is my age. I have been telling him for years, you will never see the New York Knicks win in your lifetime. And here he is at this game where I'm sure his heart was in his shoes. I'm sure he felt that awful about what was going on. And then these guys start to slowly scratch and claw their way back in the game. And inevitably when these things happen in sports, you have these commentators who are like, was it that the one team came back? Do you give them credit? Or is it that the other team choked? And usually it's a stupid question because it's usually a matter of both. In this case, though, I feel, just as an observer, it was totally self-inflicted. Yes, you can say give the Knicks credit for clawing back into the game and executing, but the analogy, I was talking to my friend who I watched with. I'm actually at his house right now, and I watched with him, his son, and a friend of his son and his daughter, and we were talking about it this morning. He's like, man, I woke up with that feeling like, oh my God, I can't believe I watched that. He said it brought back memories of when he was playing tennis and choked away a lead. He goes, it wasn't that bad, but I mean, it brought back this muscle memory of like waking up like, ugh, with this horrible feeling. Shout out to my friend Rajesh, friend of the show. And he was like, yeah, it was totally self-inflicted, because I was like, it was like being in a horse race and you're way behind the other jockey and you see the jockey pull out a gun and shoot his own horse in the legs and stumble. And it's like, well, I'll just keep trotting along and then, he's out of the race and we'll win. It was that bad. It was awful. And I cannot imagine how these guys on that team feel waking up today. Let me play you the rest of the end of the game just so you have a little bit more context and show you how this played out.
6 seconds remaining. Mike Brown, when they call a foul, they had a foul to give.
Go flat for Jalen Brunson. Allow him to operate at the top.
5.7 seconds remaining.
Brunson gets it, fires up a three. Shot no good. The tip, it's gone. It's gone. It's gone. With 1.2 remaining. Knicks take the lead.
Okay. And that was basically all she wrote last night. I got a picture from my friend, which I'll show you, from my friend Professor Pete. I'll show you the picture he took at this moment. Here, let's go. Let's make that smaller. Knicks win. There you go, folks. I would also show you a picture of my grandnephew, Elias. I shudder to say that, but my brother has recently become a grandfather, and he keeps sending me pictures of Elias, who's just a few months old, maybe like 2 or 3 months old. He keeps sending me pictures of Elias in Knicks gear. I won't show you that because I want to show you a picture of my nephew without his mom's permission. Yeah, I guess things are getting off to a good start for Elias. We'll see. There is a sense among New York fans. I didn't grow up loving basketball. My brother very much did, and as I said, my friend Pete did as well. And New York fandom is a really interesting thing in this case because while fans of teams like the New York Yankees and the New York Giants are really, really entitled and they're used to winning, especially New York Yankee fans, and they're kind of obnoxious about it. New York Knicks fans, it's the opposite experience. They feel cursed. So New York sportsdom has like both mindsets about it. It's like, oh, we've got this team that's like always winning and kicking everybody's ass, and people feel totally entitled. I've told this story of my brother looking me dead in the face, total serious, no irony whatsoever, saying, oh no, the MLB championship belongs in New York every year. In other words, he thinks the Yankees should win it every year. In fact, I think New York fans would be thrilled if the Yankees had to play the Yankees every year, and the Yankees always won. But with the hometown basketball team, or they have the Brooklyn Nets there as well, but the Knicks are really considered the hometown team, the hometown NBA team. It's the fans get the same experience as these Rust Belt towns like Cleveland, with these woe-begotten fan bases that feel cursed, or like Buffalo. I live near Buffalo. I live in Western New York State, and I know all too well the feeling of people being like, this is just never going to break our way. And it really looked like that last night. And then the ball broke their way. But the thing is, there is a sense among fans of the team that it's like, well, even though we're up 3-1 in this series, we still don't want to celebrate or get too comfortable because you never know what could happen. I personally think the chances of San Antonio Spurs coming back and winning this game are virtually zero. But I can see in comment sections and everything, Knicks fans like, no, we could still totally fuck this up. Like their nervous systems are so tuned to losing and disappointment and being slapped in the face that they can't feel like they can relax. My friend, I meant to cue this up. My friend was at Madison Square Garden in 1993. There was an infamous play where the New York Knicks are playing the Chicago Bulls, the storied Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls, who went on to just beat everybody's ass, like on this incredible, unprecedented, never since matched basketball run of sheer, unbridled victory. And the Knicks are playing the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Championship Series. And they have a chance to win the game in the final few seconds, and they missed 3 shots in a row right at the basket. My friend was like, I was there. I was a few rows behind the Knicks bench, and it is seriously the single worst sports moment of my life. And so last night he got to make up for that, I'm sure. I haven't heard much from him. I'm sure he's hoarse from screaming his head off. So shout out to him. Shout out to my brother and anybody else who's rooted for the New York Knicks. New York fans, I'm a New York native. New York fans are really annoying. They're entitled. They think New York is the center of the universe. However, they are deep sports fans. The fans of those teams in the New York City area are very much like what's the word? Students of the game, whatever the game happens to be. They are very knowledgeable. They tend to be knowledgeable. They tend to be dedicated too, even when the teams are doing badly, much to their credit. I could have done without all the shots of all the famous people, the celebrities in the front row. I really could have done without Taylor Swift being there. I have videos about Taylor Swift. You can watch those. I thought that would bring bad luck on the team. Apparently, it did not. I didn't really need to see pictures of like Jerry Seinfeld and Spike Lee and Larry David and Chris Rock and who else? And that Chalamet guy, Timothy Chalamet, Ben Stiller. It's like, what is this? The new royalty? Who gives a damn? But they're not the only fan base that has this. I mean, the LA Lakers, of course, you'd see Jack Nicholson in the stands right there in the front. This is par for the course. You see this at baseball games right behind home plate. You'll see a famous person or a bunch of famous people sitting there. It's part of it, but I could do without it. I know there were lots of long-suffering, true blue basketball fans in Madison Square Garden last night. So hats off to them. I'm glad they get to enjoy this moment. Even though it seems impossible, I would imagine they are nervous. Now, the whole complexion of this series changes. You have one team that could not, to save its life, hang on to a lead other than the one game that they won, that really had this game in the bag, could have gone back to their home court and been tied to 2-2, in which case the Knicks would have been playing with a lot more psychological pressure on them. But now I just don't see how this turns around. We'll see. I want to play you a couple of reactions to what happened last night. I'm going to start with Skapanik, who hosts a show, Scap Attack, and his reaction.
Hope they are, because this is the kind of loss which haunts you for a century. This is the kind of loss, the kind of choke job that just lingers in the back of your mouth like some disgusting taste in your mouth that you can't get rid of, no matter how much you brush your teeth or how much water you rinse throughout your mouth. This game will always be wedged in the back of the San Antonio Spurs minds. I think the fans, the players, this just an all-timer on both ends of the court. Again, biggest comeback ever, biggest choke job ever. The answer is yes.
Skapanek has such a unique way of breaking down the game and just being totally he's like the guy that on the front stoop or in the barbershop or wherever you talk sports, that can completely just rapid fire talk shit about sports, and it's really fun and entertaining. He's turned that into a brand. I want to play you the reaction, though. This is telling to me, of a former NBA player named Joe Johnson. Look how despondent Joe Johnson, who, as far as I know, wasn't really invested. I mean, he's not a fan. He's a former player. He wasn't rooting for the Spurs the way a fan would. He doesn't have that same kind of investment, from what I know. He had picked the Spurs to win the series, so he was disappointed. But look at how downcast and heavy-hearted this guy looks, just because of what he was expecting in terms of the way the story arc of this series would play out. I thought this was interesting. I'm going to play this for you right now. Here is ISO Joe Johnson on his reaction.
I mean, this, I ain't gonna lie, this one here hurt, Ocho. I ain't gonna lie to you. I mean, you got them boys on the rope like that, bro. I think when they was mixing it up good, the defense with Brunson, but late in the game when they started trapping him, the rotations started to get out of whack, and they started leaving guys up wide open for three. So Alvarado made a three, OG made a three, and I think it just kind of started to compound and they never could shake back, bro. Like they couldn't go down, get a good shot. They go down, turnover. I'm like,
they couldn't because they were tired, Joe.
They were.
Wemby played 44 minutes.
So that's ISO Joe Johnson. And he's like, I'm not going to lie, this one hurt. And that's an interesting reaction to me, in that somebody who's not an actual fan, who's a former player, and former players tend not to, they don't tend to root. They don't tend to have the same rooting interest that we fans do. They'll look at it more with the sort of cold objectivity of like, well, this is skill beating lesser skill. They can stomach these types of things if they feel like the team that's beating the other team earned that right because they are that much better. But here's the thing. These teams are rather evenly matched. And there's this sense that the San Antonio Spurs really, quote unquote, should have won at least one of the first two games, and that the series should be tied. And there's definitely a sense from a pure like basketball perspective that this series could have gone, those first three games could have gone any which way. We could be in any sort of numerical configuration of which team is in the lead in this series. There is another podcast named Speakeasy, which is hosted by two former NFL players, LaShawn McCoy and Emmanuel Acho. LaShawn McCoy is a future Hall of Fame former running back. Emmanuel Acho was a very marginal player who like barely got any time in the league, but he's made a real career for himself as an analyst. And their headline today is De'Aaron Fox, who, if you noticed in that sequence I played for you, with, I don't know, about 15 seconds left or something, De'Aaron Fox got the ball. He got a rebound from the Knicks, who failed to score, ran the ball down the court and went for a shot, which if he had just held on to the ball, they would have held on to their 1-point lead and squeaked out of New York with a win that nearly got stolen from under them. But the video title on Speakeasy's video was De'Aaron Fox should be sent to Guantanamo Bay. Again, these are athletes who don't have that same like, oh, I want to root. This is my home team, and my heart is going to break if my team doesn't win. They're looking at this from a completely different perspective. And yet this is how incensed they were at the choices made by the San Antonio Spurs players, particularly De'Aaron Fox, and also the coach. I didn't watch the video, but I mean, you cannot get around that this is a coaching miscarriage. And, I've long thought, especially around sports in general, or sports specifically, I mean, when I watch these multi-billion-dollar organizations go through these sequences of decisions that ultimately are self-defeating, after years of watching sports, I'm like, people are addicted to bad decisions. There's something about being in a position to make like an executive call and say, I am going to step in, make a choice to save, to make sure we don't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And when these guys have this paralysis and they don't do it, it's just like, what on earth creates that? I don't understand. You work your entire life to get to a point like this. I mean, there's a chance that none of these people will ever be this close to a championship again. There's a chance. In fact, it's somewhat likely that you never get this close to climbing the mountain. And you're going to sit there in inaction as the leader of a team of people who are much younger than you, looking to you for leadership. I don't understand. Maybe somebody in the comments can tell me what the culture in the NBA is of leadership, but you see this in all sports. You see this tendency to wait until you're in trouble before you pull the trigger on making a decision that could have, if you had stepped in sooner, stopped the bleeding and put a stop to this snowball effect that Joe Johnson, ISO Joe, was talking about. But he just sat there and let it happen. I'm going to play you a clip of the coach just so you can see like how he doesn't seem to grasp just how much, or he's not letting on anyway, just how much he fucked up. Like he was ineffectual. His inaction killed these guys. And make no mistake, this is a sports tragedy. I don't know if that sounds like an oxymoron to you. It's just sports. It's not a tragedy. I'll give you another example. There's a former NFL player who used to play for the Buffalo Bills, and he is also a longtime broadcaster. Now he has a podcast. His name is Marcellus Wiley. I'm a big fan of his. He worked on ESPN and Fox, and now he hosts his own podcast. And he has always said, I wasn't one of those players that was like, I have to win a championship. I have to, or else I'm a failure. He's like, look, I'm just going to do what I do. It's not that he didn't care about winning, but he was a little more detached about it and was like, it's not, my happiness is not going to hinge, or my sense of career fulfillment is not going to hinge on whether I win a championship, because that's not all in my hands. However, with that said, he was part of a devastating loss on the Buffalo Bills, which is known in infamy around here as the Music City Miracle. And he, of all people, somebody who's not like, yeah, we got to win at all costs. He's not that kind of, he doesn't have that kind of psychological makeup as a player. He talks about it a lot. He described being on the losing end of the Music City Miracle as a trauma. That's the word he used. This is somebody who speaks very openly about, African American players not resorting, or Black Americans, period, not looking at themselves as victims and not leaning back on this idea that they have collective generational trauma. He described the Music City Miracle, living through it, as trauma. He said the sense of shock in the locker room was so extreme. And I'll never forget his description of that. It's like, wow, I cannot imagine the shock and the physical, like you've just been hit by a car almost. Your system's just like, what? Of being in that locker room. Here's their coach talking in a way that I don't think is sufficiently penitent enough.
And it's a pretty clear picture if you watch the game in terms of what we did in the first half and why we scored so many points. It was pace, it was finding the paint, it was passing the ball to your teammate, it was taking good shots, and the second half was opposite of that. So, it's 76 points, one half and 30. That's a stark difference, and a lot of surface level things. You don't get to peel too many layers and dig too deep to find some differences.
Oh my God. Listen, to be fair to him, that's Mitch Johnson, the San Antonio Spurs coach. To be fair to him, I don't know. I haven't watched all the entire press conference. because it's like watching like a funeral procession. It's like so dour. It's uncomfortable to watch. But I just feel like, dude, could you fall on your sword a little bit more? Because it really is on you. It's like there really isn't any other way to slice it. You're the one who's employed to make the right call. I was talking to my friend who I watched with, and we were both saying, it's like, my friend was like, I would have waited until they missed 3 of those 3-pointers. I would have waited until 2. You could tell right off the bat when they started shooting for 3 points and missing, you could tell that they were off. Something was off kilter. And you don't wait until it's too late. You don't wait until you're sliding down the hill and the snowball is already big enough that it's going to crush your whole house. You pull the plug. You try to mitigate the damage ahead of time. This is what your job is. Not to be there like a deer in headlights. And this is the other thing. Fine. You can say he's never been in this position before as the coach. You can say they don't have the muscle memory. Their nervous systems are not attuned to the fight, flight, or freeze, whatever. But these guys have played and coached game after game after game after game. Athletes also, from what I understand, are very good at, whether you call it denial, whether you call it rationalization, they can be very good at narrowing their focus so that something that just happened 5 minutes ago doesn't affect them. At least the best ones have this like cold-blooded ability to not stress out over what has happened. So you would think that on paper, at least, a basketball coach is able to go, look, we're still up over 20 points. The momentum is starting to shift towards the other team. Let me just treat this like it's like a high school scrimmage. Let me just get these guys under control and be like, look, you've been here a million times in your body. You guys know what this feels like. Just cruise. Literally, if this team had just eaten up the clock, played conservative, boring basketball, gone for 2-point shots instead of 3-point shots, drawn fouls, protected the ball better, they would have been fine. All they had to do was keep pace, and they would have been fine. There was almost no way to lose this game. Yes, you can lose a lead this big in basketball. It's not inconceivable. But the fact that this is the biggest lead ever in NBA Finals history tells you something. And so does this expression from superstar San Antonio Spurs, Victor Wembanyama. I don't even have to play the clip. Just look at his body language. Look how he feels. This does not feel good. I don't have to be in his shoes to know, because I know for me, just sitting on my ass on the couch, it didn't feel good. It felt awful. I was watching with abject horror. Yes, I'm from New York City. I didn't grow up a basketball fan. I am not invested in the New York Knicks. I've looked at the organization as a clown show. In fact, many, many, many people look at it that way, as a badly run organization. I was like, I'm not investing in that. So I don't really have a vested interest. I feel like I just wanted the series. I wanted the story. Just like Joe Johnson. Man, we thought we had a series here. We thought we had something here. We thought we had an event. Because that's really what Joe Johnson is mourning. That this didn't go, that this wasn't more of a story of competition. This becomes a story, this becomes something legendary, but it's more almost like a sports tragedy. Like I said, that becomes a story instead of, wow, we got in a competitive 7-game series where these two teams are duking it out, almost like, Greek deities, Greek gods in our imaginations. So, as I mentioned earlier, the day before this unprecedented collapse, we got the memoir from Soundgarden co-founding lead guitarist Kim Thayil. His book, A Screaming Life, is out now. It was released on June 9th, which was Monday, which was the day before the game. Here is the cover image of that book. So I received an advance media. I received an advanced media copy, a PDF of this book months ago, and I've been dying to discuss it, but I was, there was an embargo on, you couldn't really say much about it until a couple of days ago. This book is out now. I devoured this book in days. I could not get enough of this book. Soundgarden is one of my favorite all-time bands, but aside from that, their story and their collapse, their abrupt disintegration, which happened seemingly from one moment to another when they were on top, took their fan base and the rock world more generally by complete surprise. So they founded in 1984, and they played a show in Hawaii that ended very badly, with only 2 of their members on stage. Kim Thayil was not one of them. Their bass player, Ben Shepherd, stormed off the stage. Kim Thayil is waiting in the wings to get his guitar for the band, for he and his bandmate bass player to come back on stage, while frontman Chris Cornell and drummer Matt Cameron are playing, a song together. The show sort of fizzles out. It's over, and he's thinking, it wasn't supposed to end like this. So this book comes out the day before the Spurs game. And, other than the coincidence of those two things, there are uncanny parallels, even though it's not an apples to apples comparison. But there are things that got me thinking. It's like, wow, what does that feel like to achieve this thing that so many of us dream of? People in bands, people who achieve the success, this is their lifelong dream. This is the lifelong fantasy of so many people who buy music, who listen to music, who are fans of these bands, and they got there. And then for it to just unravel so abruptly, like all of a sudden the fans got a statement a couple months after this show. This was reported. This was in February of '97. This was a show in Honolulu. There was a news item in Rolling Stone about it, about how strange it was. And then 2 months later, you get this really curt, very succinct statement from the band, after 12 years, blah, 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 we've decided to go our separate ways. And in my experience of all the articles I've read, of, so many of the interviews that I've watched, by the way, I'm interviewing Kim Thayil next week, so subscribe to the channel to check that out. I will be posting that entire interview here on the channel. I've interviewed Thayil 3 times before. I had my worst interviewing moment actually was with Thayil when I had a malfunction, but I'll get to that in a second. So this was, in my opinion, this is the most tight-lipped breakup I've ever known about. In fact, I have long suspected that the members of Soundgarden signed a non-disclosure agreement legally prohibiting them from going into detail about why they broke up. Their breakup seemed completely out of left field, and we've never really gotten an answer about it. They never really said much over the years. Even when I interviewed Thayil 3 times, I interviewed him in 2012 and then again in 2018, I believe it was. He was really tight-lipped and evasive about it. The most I got from him was that at the time that they broke up, he and drummer Matt Cameron were thinking about that there was going to be another Soundgarden album, and there wasn't. But he didn't elaborate much on that. And I remember he downplayed the whole Ben Shepherd throwing his bass incident to me. He's like, oh, well, that could have been any other day. That wasn't unusual. That wasn't the thing. He was like, oh, that wasn't the thing that broke us up. Now we finally get a glimpse into what really happened with this book. If you're a fan of this band, I cannot say enough. Just go get this book. I don't want to spoil anything for you. I will say this. I had waited 30 years. And as this book starts, again, this band was really tight-lipped. I had experiences interviewing Thayil in the past where he was really evasive for the most part. He gave me a little tiny glimpse of something, but pulled back from that, didn't disclose much. As the book gets started, you're not really getting much of a sense of the interpersonal dynamic of the band. And I'm like, wow, I think this guy is going to go this whole book and not spill the tea on what the fans want to know, which is what happened when the band broke up the first time, what led up to their reunion, and what was the aftermath of Chris Cornell, frontman, guitarist, primary songwriter, taking his own life in 2017. What was the aftermath of that? What is that like to be on tour with somebody and then wake up the next morning and find out that, oh, that person, your frontman, just took his own life? Where do you even go from that kind of experience? So as the book is going, Thayil has this very economical presentation. I'm not sure how much he wrote versus how much the book was dictated. to its co-author, but I'm not sure how much he sat down and wrote versus how much this was just a product of discussions with co-writer Adam Tepedalin. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Adam Tepedalin. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Yes, I know what that feels like quite a bit. Adam Tepedalin. So I'm not sure how much Thayil sat and wrote at a keyboard or a typewriter or pen and paper. I will ask him next week. How was this book assembled? How much did you actually write? How much did you compose this manuscript? Versus a lot of these rock biographies, these autobiographies, you get the sense it's just a conversation that was carved. It's just prose carved out of like hours and hours and hours and hours of audio, basically. We'll find out. So tune in next week. But it did seem written to me, and it did seem like there's this very lean, economical style of writing or of communicating. This phrasing style. His Thayil's way of his phrasing is not very ornate. There's not much fat on the bone here. He doesn't go on and on and on with flowery prose. He's very sort of to the point and very it's very unadorned. It's a very unadorned account of the band's history. I was like, reading this, and I'm like, man, he's not gonna tell us much. like he's gonna kind of skirt around the issue, and we're not gonna get much of a sense of what really made these guys tick, and most of all, what led to their demise. Like, what was the interpersonal dynamic that created their downfall? I was not hopeful as I started this book. I was, on the edge of my seat, enjoying the accounts of the early days of the founding of the band. It's interesting because they started with Thayil on guitar, a bass player named Hiro Yamamoto, and Chris Cornell was actually their drummer and singer to start out with. Fascinating, because he kind of started like Phil Collins, sort of. He didn't establish himself as a drummer like Phil Collins did, obviously, but at a certain point in the history of the band, early on, they were looking for either a drummer or a singer. Chris Cornell could have gone either way. He would have been fine sitting behind the drum kit and never, like, if they had found a singer, he'd have been fine with that at the time, which is really, really interesting to think about. Of course, they end up getting a drummer, first Scott Sundquist, then Matt Cameron. They very early on developed this very quirky approach to rhythm, which is really their signature. Both Chris Cornell and their eventual drummer, Matt Cameron, have this uncanny, very natural, very instinctual attraction to odd, angular time signatures that at the same time they were able to smooth over to make them sound even. This is drummer Matt Cameron, who you can see here all the way to the right. Kim Thayil is the one with the sunglasses in the middle with the long hair and the white shirt. Chris Cornell is to his right, and then that's Ben Shepherd all the way on the left, drinking something with his profile to us. And their sort of herky-jerky, strange ability to play in odd time signatures, which they weren't even aware of at the beginning, is one of the primary foundations of the Soundgarden sound. Thayil started as the band's only guitar player, but slowly, gradually over time, Chris Cornell starts to play more and more and more guitar. He starts to write more and more and more. And I don't want to say the balance of power shifts, but eventually you have Chris Cornell and Kim Thayil playing. It becomes a 2-guitar band, and Chris Cornell's playing guitar on just about everything, while Kim Thayil is more of a lead / textural guitar player. He's got a very, very distinctive, like utterly unique approach to solos. And like so many of my favorite guitar players, he'll do these little ornamental bits. He'll do like a little wailing guitar here, or a sort of a trill, or this sort of wash of short-lived sound that just punctuates the song in this way that I find utterly thrilling. I think it's amazing that these two guys were able to make their guitar style blend, because on paper, like when I listen to it as somebody who's mixed music, like from the perspective of like, how would I mix this? If somebody brought me these two guitar tones, the tones and their styles wouldn't have struck me initially as very compatible, and yet somehow they mesh them together in this way that is really beautiful, really, really, really interesting. The other interesting thing is, because Thayil's family is from Kerala, India, he grew up in the States. He grew up in Chicago, in the Chicago area. But because he's of Indian descent, there's a lot of Soundgarden's music that sounds Eastern tinged, and people assume that comes from him. Most of the time it doesn't, actually. Songs like Half and Switch Opens, and I'm trying to think if there's another one too. He's not the primary source of the Eastern sounding flavor and the aroma in Soundgarden's music. A lot of that actually was Ben Shepherd, which is pretty cool, because Kim Thayil grew up loving bands like Kiss and the MC5 and punk music and stuff like that. There was a droney element to his playing, but other than that, anything that you hear in Soundgarden that says like, oh, that sounds, like it could be like an Indian scale or like a Middle Eastern kind of, vibe to it. That's not him, which is actually really, really, really cool. Soundgarden is one of those bands where, when you get to the lineup that you see on the screen here with Ben Shepherd on bass, I think every single person in that band, or all four of them in this lineup, in the classic lineup, was indispensable, was irreplaceable. They are a band that had a very, very pronounced, a very profound chemistry where everybody there was super important to the whole. In fact, I think everybody in that band was what I would call a secret weapon. In music, when you refer to somebody as being the secret weapon, it's somebody who doesn't get as much credit as like the main focal points of the band, but who, without them, they're the missing link. They're the catalyst. There's something about what they do that without them, the band sound just wouldn't be what it is. In this case, all four of these guys are that, because the drummer, Matt Cameron, his approach to time is completely like defines what they are. Similarly, Chris Cornell's songwriting and his approach to time, the way the two of them locked in, like Chris Cornell's songwriting, even though he's the singer and the front man and he's the focal point and he's the one, on the cover of all the magazines, his songwriting and his guitar playing, actually. His guitar playing was also indispensable, which I don't think he gets enough credit for that. And in fact, Kim Thayil, I'll give you a little teensy taste. In the book, doesn't quite, let's just say he doesn't see it the way I do. So I'll give you that little tidbit. He doesn't recognize Chris Cornell's guitar playing as indispensable as I do. I think Chris Cornell had a really distinctive guitar style, not just as a songwriter. He wasn't just this strummy, I'm strumming a guitar to support my voice as a quote unquote songwriter, kind of singer-songwriter kind of guy. He had a really interesting, unorthodox guitar style, along with Thayil's really, really, really unorthodox guitar style. And then there's Ben Shepherd, who I think when Ben Shepherd joined the band, that's really when they clicked for me as this incredible musical organism. Ben Shepherd wrote a lot of songs. He was a multi-instrumentalist. He had a really also unorthodox approach, not only to bass, but to everything, and brought a lot to the table on their last 3 records. So let me get into this book, or back to the book itself. I didn't think it was going to. I was like, all right, he's gonna dance around this, or he's gonna say as little as possible. This is not a tell-all kind of book. I'm not really getting a sense of what the interpersonal dynamic between these guys is from this book. I'm still finding it really entertaining. I'm still really curious. I'm getting a lot of detail about the making of these records. I'm getting a lot of detail about his approach to guitar, and the band's career climb is a big deal, or a big component of this book. Management decisions, record labels. Soundgarden had an interesting career trajectory because they start out on Sub Pop. They are, in fact, the first release ever on the label Sub Pop. Bruce Pavitt, one of the founders of Sub Pop, grew up basically with Kim Thayil and Hiro Yamamoto in the suburbs of Chicago. There's this awesome part where Thayil gets kicked out of his house, and he has to crash with the Pavits for like days, I think, before he knows where he can go. It's pretty cool. And so Thayil and Yamamoto migrate to Seattle, and either Bruce Pavitt is already there, or he ends up there later, and it's Kim Thayil who suggests that Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman that they meet, and then they end up forming Sub Pop, and that of course becomes one of the iconic chapters in music history. The Sub Pop, the founding of Sub Pop getting off the ground, and of course the emergence of the Seattle grunge sound with bands like Soundgarden, the Melvins, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and of course Nirvana. And then there's bands like Mudhoney and Grunt Truck, et cetera, et cetera. So Soundgarden put their first couple of releases, or their first release on, it's called Screaming Life. So the book is titled A Screaming Life. It's named after that. That was supposed to be a full-length album, which I knew this for years, even before reading the book. But it turns out it's an EP. Then they are being courted by A&M Records, but they sign with SST Records, which is the label founded by Black Flag guitarist and leader Greg Ginn. Black Flag is one of the iconic underground hardcore. They are, essentially the face of American underground hardcore and this indie DIY ethic before that's even a term. Greg Ginn is responsible with Black Flag in creating an infrastructure out of nothing, of being able to release their own records and tour places. They did not tour conventional venues. So, schools, VFW halls. If you read Henry Rollins' book, Get in the Van, this is what this is about. It's about just like going out there and making something happen with nothing. So this is what Greg Ginn represented and SST, their label, represented. So Soundgarden wanted a label like that to put out their record, and then their third release, Louder Than Love, then they're on A&M Records. And that whole climb is covered in the book. And so their third release is, I consider it their third album. It's Louder Than Love. It's actually their second full length, but whatever. It starts to get airplay on, in college radio stations start to pick up on it. There's a video for a song named Loud Love, and they start to be courted to a metal audience. This is where I first hear about Soundgarden in 1989. They are played on a show named Metal Shop, which if you grew up in that time period, anywhere in the US, you had access to a syndicated radio show named Metal Shop. I don't know about anywhere in the US, but in major radio markets, this would play. And I started seeing them in magazines. I heard a song from Louder Than Love. I think it was the first song, called Ugly Truth. And to where my listening was at, this band sounded like something that was like metal adjacent. They tour that same year, 1989, going into early 1990 as part of a package tour. They are the middle slot on a bill headlined by the thrash metal band Voivod, who I'm a huge fan of and was at the time. So I go see Voivod, Soundgarden, and Faith No More. I had never heard Faith No More at this time. In January of 1989 at the Ritz in New York City. And, at this point, I'm entrenched as a Soundgarden fan. It's interesting because, this felt at the time like a historic bill where all three, like the careers of all three of these bands, all three of them seemed like they were on the rise, and it seemed that way. But Soundgarden and Faith No More go this way, and Voivod goes in the opposite direction at that point. But I still remain a huge Voivod fan. They're legendary. They're beloved among musicians. Soundgarden then puts out their second A&M album, Bad Motorfinger. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. And at this point, this is when Ben Shepherd has now joined the band. He contributes several songs. They tour with Guns N' Roses. And then they tour as part of the second Lollapalooza bill. I saw them at the second Lollapalooza, and what was the point I was getting at? So this is the point I was getting at. So this is their breakout album. They have an MTV. They have a couple of videos that are played on MTV, Jesus Christ Pose, Rusty Cage, and of course the song Outshined, which is still played on like modern rock, corporate rock, alternative rock radio today. So that album does better than the previous one. And then they put out Super Unknown in 1994. They release it on the same day as Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral, and the album magnified by the band Failure, who I've talked about a bunch on this channel and have much more to say actually on this channel about. So if you like Failure, I would urge you to subscribe. They put out Super Unknown, and that hits #1, I believe, on the Billboard charts here in the States. And they have this big radio hit with Black Hole Sun, and you kind of think they're on top of the world. But I noticed this because I saw them in 1994. I felt that the band looked despondent and spiritually defeated, even as they're reaching the pinnacle of their success. This is their peak in terms of commercial success. They're riding high, and they look very different to me than they did in 1992 and in 1990 when I saw them. They were scrappy. They were motivated. There was this sense that Kim Thayil himself has said, or Chris Cornell has said, it was sort of like us against the world, just in a van, like we're out there conquering. And they get to the mountaintop and they don't seem happy. In fact, they seem miserable. This is not something I can pinpoint. This is partially substantiated, sort of, by what I read in the book. Not entirely. I don't know that Thayil would even concur with my assessment, but I will show you this clip from the film Hype, which is a documentary about the Seattle scene, which was released in 1996. So when it finally came out, it ended up being this epitaph for grunge, which was already on its way out. Like, the grunge trend was basically already dead by the point the film hit the theaters. but it was filmed in 1994. It was filmed 2 years earlier. It was filmed during the peak of all this attention that these bands were getting. But because it took 2 years to finally be released, the sense of it is different when we watch it now. Director Doug Prey, who I interviewed for a piece in Paste magazine after Chris Cornell's suicide, he has said for a long time, this is the last time that Seattle was the last time where we're ever going to see a regional scene ever like that. Because right after that, the internet takes off and regional distinctions between bands and between sounds and styles of music have been completely flattened by this ambient communication where you can now reach everybody all the time. And he still, when I interviewed him in 2017, he argued that was the case. He said, interestingly, not to me, but he said this in another interview. He said, because I'm about to play you a clip of Soundgarden from the film Hype, where Kim Thayil talks over the live footage. He said, I filmed Soundgarden playing an arena in Seattle. So this is like supposed to be a I'm adding this now, but this is me talking. But this is supposed to be like a triumphant homecoming show. And he said they were playing awesome, but they seemed almost scared of their success. They seemed, and I'm paraphrasing again, they seemed weighted down by it. Let me play you this clip of Soundgarden from the film Hype and Kim Thayil talking, because this does back up what I have long suspected about this band, that success dispirited them.
Kind of figured you'd play guitar or drums, whatever, sing, make a record, play a show, and people like your record, they like your show. Couldn't really anticipate it becoming interviews and videos and photo sessions. And somewhere in the forefront of our mind, we knew that these were things that went along with the job. You never really can anticipate it until you're there. It's like, wow, do without the fame stuff and just give me your money.
There's a little bit of Kim. Woo! All right, I better fade that out before I get in trouble here. I probably already have. That probably will be a copyright issue. So look, that's funny too. Like his like wry way of speaking. He's like, I could do with the money, but not the rest. So he says it right there. I mean, he talks about it right there in that clip. This is a band that was on the climb upwards. They seemed very motivated. They were very unified in their mission to succeed. And then when they got there, it was more burdensome than they had anticipated. I feel like this comes across. If you go to YouTube and watch different clips, I felt this watching them in 1994. And, I will say, if you're looking for the answer as to what happened, as to what ultimately pulled this band apart, you get it in the book. I'm not going to divulge any more than that. But it does deliver on what was going on, and it also does deliver on, after they got back together, what the aftermath of Chris Cornell's suicide was and how that hit them. There's a lot in this book. If you're a fan of this band, I cannot imagine that you will not just gobble this book up the way I did. And even if you just like rock biographies in general and are just interested in reading about or listening to, in this case, because there's an audiobook version where Thayil narrates it himself. I have not heard that yet. I will be listening to that before my interview to get a different flavor of what the book is like. But if you sit down and read it, it has a really sort of snappy, kind of crackling flow to it. Again, if you have even a marginal interest in the story of bands that succeed and then ultimately fall apart, I think you'll enjoy the book. I really recommend it. And if you're a fan of this band in particular, I just can't see how you wouldn't be satisfied by this book. And again, I don't want to say too much. I want to give people a chance to sit with it. My interview will contain spoilers because I'm going to be asking him questions. For a very, very, very long time, I had wanted to ask not only the members of Soundgarden, but members of other bands like Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots, what the transition was like when they put out these albums in 1992 and 1994 that are going multi-platinum, and then all three of those bands that I mentioned put out albums in 1996 that don't sell as well. And I, for the longest time, had wanted to know how much that contributed to Soundgarden's breakup. Was there a sense of like closing the ranks? What was the record label and management's sense of like, wow, you guys sold 5 million copies last time, and now your new album is selling 1 million copy. Again, this happened with Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots as well. And I'm thinking, are the record labels panicking? Are they thinking this is a failure? Or are they thinking, well, 1 million is still 1 million? Because I remember the promotional push for what was then Soundgarden's final album, Down on the Upside, which is actually my second favorite album by them. I absolutely love that album. And I see it written up all the time as if it is somehow infused with this sense of the inevitability that grunge was over. I've seen it written up multiple times as this kind of epitaph for grunge, that it is the sound of a band fading out. And I don't hear it that way. But I have a really hard time hearing it now in hindsight, knowing that the band broke up. Now I hear the band's breakup in between the grooves. Whereas when I first heard it for the first year it was out, I didn't hear it that way. In fact, I remember hearing it as this triumphant, really assertive, really creatively assertive, creatively bounding statement, like, we can cover all this ground and we are going to keep expanding and expanding and expanding our reach in terms of what our range is, what we can do. We're going to show you more and more and more of what we can do. I didn't think it was a particularly cohesive album. I thought it was hard to listen to from start to finish, but I thought, wow, man, this band is really starting to flex and stretch and spread its wings. And I think they can survive the death of grunge. And I remember the promotional push. I remember they were on the cover of so many magazines. There were radio interviews. There were multiple MTV segments, like long MTV segments, like following them around for like, the whole show, multiple episodes. It seemed to me like clearly the record company was like, yeah, we struck gold with you guys last time. You guys sold 5 million. Let's do this again. Yeah, let's go. Let's get everything ready. Let's get everything oiled up. Let's do this. Right. And then that didn't happen. And then they abruptly break up. And I had wanted to ask I had been dying to know from all three of those bands, but particularly from Soundgarden, it's like, how much did you feel like you were under pressure because you went from here to here, even though here is still really high? And I got to ask this of Kim Thayil in an interview I did for Billboard, and he told me, he said it didn't. He said it felt like they were still doing well, and they were not very interested. They weren't very preoccupied with sales to begin with. Wasn't really the most substantial answer, but I got my answer. I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't an issue, supposedly, at least as far as he was concerned, or at least as far as he picked up on. There wasn't this sense of like having to circle the wagons because, wow, now our career is in decline, where it was, it was going this way, where it was going this way before. He answered the question, and I had a malfunction where all of his answers to that interview were erased. Someday I'm going to publish that interview where you can only hear my questions and my responses to his responses. I even found a former FBI audio expert who I sent a little clip to, and I'm like, can you restore this? And they couldn't. And you can almost make out words. And that day I decided to get new software, and I was like, I'm not going to let this happen again. It was the lowest moment of my interviewing life. Like I had waited 20 plus years to ask this question. I had been dying to know. I finally got to ask it of him, and then I couldn't keep the response. The response wasn't super satisfying to begin with, but I got to ask, and I had this glitch happen. And I will post that at some point on the channel. And it was a really, really dreadful moment. I'm sure the San Antonio Spurs can relate to something like that, where you show up for a day at the office, you're ready to take destiny into your own hands, you feel like you're doing great. And that's what was happening during that interview. I was getting the answers. I got a little bit of a glimpse into their breakup, even though he was evasive, got a little glimpse. He did let on a little bit, right? Which I won't divulge here because I want you to experience it in the book. When I post the audio of just me from that interview, or the missing audio, I will introduce it, and I will give you the best recollection of what Kim Thayil shared with me about what contributed to their breakup. In the meantime, go read about it. A Screaming Life is out now. And let's all take a moment to, I don't know, maybe tip our cap or something, or at least recognize the San Antonio Spurs, who have this incredible team spirit, who have this chemistry that reminds me a lot of a band. Not to take anything away from the New York Knicks, who I think have a very workmanlike, they're almost like plumbers or union workers, like they just show up to work. They are not unlikable by any means, but the Spurs have this team, this like sort of ineffable team chemistry where a lot of them do a lot of different things, and they can each carry a lot of different weight, and they're all excellent, or many of them are excellent players in their own right. Much like the way I felt about Soundgarden. Right now, this team is probably, these guys are probably in the worst pit of despair that they've ever felt in their lives, at least in terms of their sport, in terms of their career, the game they play. I would be really, really interested to see how athletes recover or don't from something like this, how they turn their feelings off and keep trying, keep chipping away, keep making an effort. If they somehow were to pull off some kind of miracle and come back and win this series, I mean, my God, that would be a story for the ages. Let's see. I don't think it's likely. I think there's a snowball's chance in hell of that happening. But I mean, I also thought the same thing when the Boston Red Sox came back 0 games. They were down 3 games to none. to the New York Yankees in the 2004 American League Championship Series. They looked abysmal. They looked absolutely atrocious. It looked like there was 0.0000. It looked like there was a negative chance of them coming back and winning that series, which up until that point had never been done in baseball history, and yet they pulled it off. It wouldn't be for lack of ability. Like my friend Rajesh, whose house I'm at right now, who I watched the game with, he said, this is all psychological. This is all mental. Everything we saw last night with this team literally giving this game away. Literally, well, not literally, but like I said, being like a jockey, being like Secretariat at like 31 fucking lengths ahead of the next horse, and then the jockey just like dives off the horse or like yanks it and, runs it off into the stands, or like, takes the horse and shoots it in the head. That's what it was. It was a mental, you could see the buildup, the pileup of stress and uncertainty and this oh shit kind of feeling just mounting and mounting and mounting. And you could see it on the faces of the San Antonio Spurs. So a moment of recognition to them and a moment of recognition to the New York Knicks and their fan base. Hats off to all the Soundgarden fans and anybody who's going to read this book. I would love to hear from you. Check out my interview with Kim Thayil next week. And in the meantime, let's all do our best to not /defeat from the jaws of victory. Do our best not to make self-defeating decisions. We are all prone to them on our own. And we know that when they happen in front of us for all the world to see, these things hurt, even when you don't have a vested interest in the outcome. That's all I got for you for today. For Feedback Def, I am Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist, urging you to hit the like, subscribe, notification, and hype buttons, urging you to comment. Other than that, thanks for hanging with me. Over and out.